Mafia boss kicked the black girl out of his club. Then she took his power. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to the main character. Aaliyah Thomas had always known she wasn't the type to be noticed in a world where money and power dictated everything. She had spent most of her life keeping her head down, working at a small cafe in the heart of the city, far from the glitz and glam of the elite. But one night, everything changed. She was walking down the street when she was pulled into a luxurious nightclub, drawn in by the flashing lights and the rhythm of the music. A friend had convinced her to come along, promising it would be a fun night. Little did she know, this night would change the course of her life forever. As soon as she entered the club, the atmosphere was electric. The beat of the music pulsed through her body, but something felt off. She noticed the stares from the people around her, the looks of judgment, and the subtle whispers. Aaliyah wasn't the type to care much about such things, but tonight it was different. A man at the door, dressed in an expensive suit, eyed her suspiciously before nodding his head in approval. She walked past, unsure of what to expect. That was when she saw him, Vince DeLuca, the Mafia boss, seated at a VIP booth with a group of his associates. He looked like he owned the world, and in many ways, he did. Vince had a reputation for being ruthless, a man who got what he wanted without hesitation, without mercy. He noticed Aaliyah the moment she stepped into the room. His eyes briefly met hers, and for a moment, there was a flicker of recognition, but it was gone as quickly as it came. He waved his hand lazily, signaling for one of the club's security to approach. Aaliyah didn't know what was happening, but the next thing she knew, she was being escorted out. The security guard's grip on her arm was firm, but not painful. "You don't belong here," he muttered under his breath, pushing her out the door and into the cold night air. Aaliyah stood there, confused and humiliated. She had never been treated like this before. No one had ever dismissed her so easily. She looked around, the reality of the situation sinking in. Vince had just kicked her out of his club, and she had no idea why. As she walked away, she couldn't help but wonder what it was about her that made him think he could do that. Was it because of the way she looked? Or the fact that she didn't belong to his world? It didn't matter, though. Something inside her clicked. The injustice of it all stirred something deep within her. She wasn't going to let this go. Aaliyah knew what she had to do. She wasn't going to be someone who was cast aside. No, this was the beginning of her fight to take what was rightfully hers. And she was going to start by taking his power. I have always believed that people who are knocked down by life have the greatest potential to rise higher than anyone else. Aaliyah had spent years staying quiet, working hard in the background, never drawing attention to herself. But when Vince DeLuca, the ruthless Mafia boss, had humiliated her, something inside her sparked. This wasn't the end for her. It was only the beginning. She was done being ignored, done being stepped on by those who thought they had the power to decide her worth. Aaliyah didn't have wealth or connections like Vince, but she had something far more valuable: knowledge, determination, and an unshakable will to succeed. After being kicked out of the club that night, Aaliyah went back to her small apartment. She barely slept, tossing and turning in bed, replaying the scene in her mind over and over. How dare he? How dare Vince think he could throw her out without a second thought? She could feel the sting of his words and the coldness of his dismissal, but instead of letting it break her, she let it fuel her anger. She knew that the world Vince lived in wasn't one she could easily infiltrate, but she also knew that the Mafia boss wasn't untouchable. No one was. She just needed the right plan, the right timing, and the right people. The next day, Aaliyah began her research. She knew that Vince's club was only the tip of the iceberg. His wealth and power came from far darker corners of the city, from illegal dealings, money laundering, and the kind of business that only those with the highest connections could get involved in. But what Vince didn't know was that Aaliyah wasn't just some girl with a broken heart and bruised pride. She had connections of her own. She started with small steps, gathering intel about the club, learning the layout, talking to people who worked for Vince, staff who had seen things they shouldn't have. She made friends, built relationships, and found the cracks in the empire that Vince had spent years constructing. It didn't take long before Aaliyah had everything she needed. She knew the club's financial secrets, the shady deals happening behind closed doors, and the key players who were crucial to Vince's empire. But she didn't rush in. Instead, she took her time, letting the pieces fall into place. Days turned into weeks, and during this time, she moved silently, like a shadow, never revealing her hand. Then one evening, the opportunity she had been waiting for arrived. Vince had a private meeting scheduled with one of his partners, someone who had just arrived in the city. The meeting was set to take place in a back room of the club, away from the prying eyes of the public. It was the perfect chance. Aaliyah waited until the club was bustling with the usual crowd, the lights dimmed, and the music thumping through the walls. She knew exactly where Vince would be. Slipping through the back corridors of the club, she approached the hidden door that led to Vince's private office. Her heart was pounding, but her steps were steady. She had done her homework, and now it was time to act. The security outside the door was minimal, just two men who didn't think anyone would dare enter the VIP area without an invitation. But Aaliyah wasn't just anyone. She had already scoped out the security system. With a simple press of a button, she deactivated the cameras in the hallway, silencing the alarms. The door to the meeting room creaked open just enough for her to slip. Inside, unnoticed, Vince was seated at the table, leaning back in his chair, his eyes locked on his partner. Aaliyah didn't hesitate. She walked into the room, her presence immediately demanding attention. Vince's eyes flicked toward her, and for a brief moment, surprise crossed his face. "What are you doing here?" he asked, his tone sharp, but not unguarded. "I've come to finish what you started," Aaliyah replied, her voice calm but steady. She placed a thick envelope on the table in front of him. "You made a mistake, Vince. One that you'll regret." Vince's expression darkened, his lips curling into a sneer. "I don't have time for games. Get out." Aaliyah didn't move. Instead, she opened the envelope, revealing the documents she had carefully gathered. Every deal, every illegal transaction Vince had made over the years, every name of the people who had been part of his shady business. All of it was in that envelope. Vince's eyes widened as he recognized the documents. "You think you can take me down with this?" he hissed. "You're nothing." Aaliyah stood tall, her gaze unwavering. "I'm not here to take you down, Vince. I'm here to take what's mine. Your power, your empire, and everything you've built will fall, piece by piece, starting now." Vince stood up, his face twisted in anger. "You'll regret this, girl," he snarled, but there was a hint of uncertainty in his voice. Aaliyah smiled, knowing that the game had just begun. She wasn't just playing for the power, she was playing to win. Aaliyah's eyes never left Vince as he sat there, fuming with anger. The silence in the room stretched on, but Aaliyah knew better than to flinch. Vince may have been the Mafia boss, but at this moment, she was in control. The documents she had carefully gathered sat before him, and with each passing second, the reality of what she was offering him sank deeper into his mind. Vince opened the envelope and scanned the contents. His hand trembled ever so slightly as he realized just how much Aaliyah knew. "You think you can just walk in here and destroy everything I've built?" he said, his voice low and threatening, but there was a flicker of doubt in his eyes. Aaliyah stayed calm. "You didn't destroy anything. You just made it easier for me to take it all." She smiled confidently, letting her words sink in. "This isn't about revenge, Vince. It's about opportunity. And I'm taking mine." Vince stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. He paced around the room, his mind racing. Aaliyah could almost see the gears turning as he processed the situation. She had just exposed him in ways he never thought possible, and now he had to make a choice. Face the consequences of his actions, or find a way to stop her. But what could he possibly do? His empire was built on deception, and Aaliyah held the truth in her hands. Aaliyah could sense Vince's frustration. He had never encountered someone like her before, someone who wasn't intimidated by his wealth or his power. She had something he could never buy: grit, intelligence, and the courage to stand up to him. "You're playing a dangerous game, Aaliyah," Vince warned, his voice thick with menace. "You think you can win against me?" Aaliyah didn't hesitate. "I'm not trying to win against you. I'm trying to take what's mine. The difference is, you don't even know it yet." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Aaliyah turned and walked toward the door, her heels clicking sharply against the floor, signaling that she was done with this conversation for now. But she knew Vince wouldn't let it go. He wasn't the type to back down, and neither was she. The game was just beginning, and she had the upper hand. Outside the office, the night air was crisp and cool, a stark contrast to the heated tension inside. Aaliyah took a deep breath, her thoughts racing. She had set her plan in motion, but now she needed to stay one step ahead. As she walked down the long hallway, her mind was already working on the next move. She had the information she needed, but there was more to this than just exposing Vince's illegal activities. She wanted to take his power. She wanted to see him brought down, not just as a criminal, but as the man who thought he could control everything, everyone. The next few days passed in a blur. Aaliyah continued to gather more intel, learning the ins and outs of Vince's operations. She spent her nights poring over documents, making connections, and planning her next moves. She was patient, meticulous, and above all, determined. Vince's world was built on fear, but Aaliyah had something far more dangerous than fear. She had a vision, and that vision was becoming clearer every day. Vince had underestimated her. He had thought she was just another woman he could toss aside. But he didn't realize that Aaliyah wasn't just any woman. She wasn't intimidated by his money, his power, or his reputation. She knew that true power came from understanding people, their weaknesses, and their desires. And that's where Vince had failed. One evening, Aaliyah received a call from one of her informants. There was an opportunity to strike. Vince had made a move, and it was exactly what she had been waiting for. It was time to act. The next night, she entered the club again, this time without the hesitation or fear she had once felt. She had come for one thing: control. She wasn't just a player anymore. She was the one calling the shots. Aaliyah stepped into the club once again, but this time, everything felt different. The buzzing atmosphere was the same. Flashy lights, loud music, and laughter echoing through the air, but she wasn't the same person who had been humiliated just a few nights ago. She wasn't here to blend in. She wasn't here to be overlooked. She had a mission, and this time, she was in control. The same security guard who had thrown her out that night gave her a passing glance as she walked through the door. But Aaliyah didn't flinch. She didn't even spare him a second glance. Tonight, she was a woman on a mission. She was no longer the girl who had been dismissed like an afterthought. She was the one who held the power. Inside the club, the usual crowd was milling about, enjoying their drinks, chatting with friends, and dancing to the beats. But there was a tense undercurrent tonight, something that Aaliyah could sense in the air. She moved through the crowd with purpose, knowing exactly where she needed to be. Vince's booth was just ahead, and she could see him sitting with a group of his associates, enjoying his usual position of power. But she wasn't going to let that stop her. She wasn't here to play by his rules anymore. As she approached, Aaliyah's presence was noticed. She could feel the subtle shift in the energy around her. People stepped aside, eyes following her every move. Vince looked up, his gaze meeting hers for a split second before a smirk spread across his face. "Back again, are you?" he asked, his tone dripping with sarcasm. But Aaliyah wasn't intimidated. She stood tall, her eyes locked onto his, unwavering. "I'm here to take what's mine," she said, her voice calm but filled with certainty. Vince raised an eyebrow, clearly amused by her words. "You're delusional if you think you can just walk in here and claim anything," he said, chuckling to himself. But Aaliyah wasn't backing down. She stepped closer, her heels clicking with confidence on the floor. "I'm not here to claim anything," she replied. "I'm here to take everything you have." Vince's smirk faltered for just a moment, and that was all Aaliyah needed. The game was on. The tension in the air thickened as Aaliyah continued to approach him. The power dynamics in this room were shifting, and Vince could feel it. He was no longer in control. She was. She had spent the past few weeks carefully plotting her next move, gathering intel, and learning everything she could about Vince's operations. The documents she had exposed earlier were just the beginning. Now, she had everything she needed. She had connections, resources, and most importantly, a plan. Aaliyah's eyes never left Vince's as she spoke, her voice steady and assertive. "You think you have everything under control," she said. "But I know your secrets. I know your weaknesses, and I'm not afraid to use them against you." Vince's face hardened, but he said nothing. He knew, deep down, that Aaliyah wasn't bluffing. She was playing a game he had never prepared for. He had underestimated her from the very beginning, and now, he was paying the price. "You think you can take me down with your little documents?" Vince asked, his voice cold. "You think you can just waltz in here and take over my business?" Aaliyah didn't answer right away. Instead, she stepped closer to him, her gaze unwavering. "I'm not here to take over your business," she said, her voice low and confident. "I'm here to take your power." Vince's eyes flickered with uncertainty for the briefest moment, and Aaliyah knew she had him. He may have been the boss of the Mafia, but in this moment, she was the one who held the cards. The room fell silent as Aaliyah's words sank in. Vince's associates exchanged uneasy glances, unsure of what was happening. Aaliyah had just turned the tables, and Vince was powerless to stop her. "You've lost, Vince," Aaliyah said softly, but the words carried with them a sense of finality. "Your empire is crumbling, and there's nothing you can do to fix it." Vince clenched his jaw, his eyes narrowing as he stared at her. But deep down, he knew she was right. She had played him at his own game, and now he had no choice but to face the consequences. Aaliyah turned and began to walk away, her confidence radiating with every step. She had won. She had taken his power, and there was nothing Vince could do to take it back. Aaliyah stood outside the club, her mind racing with the victory she had just claimed. Vince DeLuca, once a man whose power seemed untouchable, was now left scrambling in the wake of her actions. She had done it. She had taken control. But as she walked through the city streets, her thoughts weren't consumed with celebration. She knew this was just the beginning. There was so much more to do. Aaliyah wasn't a person who thrived on quick wins. No, she was focused on lasting power. She had taken Vince's power, yes, but it was the empire that truly mattered, and that empire was vast. It spanned far beyond the walls of his club, and she needed to solidify her position before anyone even thought of challenging her. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of meetings, decisions, and careful maneuvering. Aaliyah, though young, had the mind of someone far beyond her years. She had studied Vince's empire, analyzed its weaknesses, and learned the game of power in ways most would never understand. She knew who to trust, who to manipulate, and who needed to be cut out entirely. Every step she took brought her closer to a world where she, not Vince, controlled the strings. Aaliyah's rise didn't go unnoticed. People in the underground world began whispering about the girl who had taken down one of the most feared men in the city. Some were intrigued by her audacity, while others questioned how long she could hold onto the power she had seized. But Aaliyah wasn't worried. She knew exactly how to play the game. It was a game she had been preparing for her entire life, and now she was ready to make her move. One evening, she sat in her new office, a sleek, modern space in the heart of the city, facing a decision that could either secure her future or destroy everything she had built. She stared at the documents spread out in front of her, each one representing a different part of Vince's operation. The pieces were finally coming together, but one last move had to be made. She needed to cut out the final piece, the one person who could threaten everything she had worked for. The man in charge of Vince's finances, a man named Richard, had been with him for years. He was loyal, smart, and incredibly dangerous if left unchecked. Aaliyah had spent weeks learning about him, uncovering his weaknesses and identifying the right time to strike. And tonight was that time. She picked up her phone, dialed a number, and waited as the line rang. When the voice on the other end answered, she didn't hesitate. "Richard, it's time," she said calmly. "Meet me at the warehouse. We need to talk." Richard's response was curt, but Aaliyah knew he would come. He had no choice. The following hours were a blur of calculated planning, as Aaliyah prepared herself for the meeting that would cement her power once and for all. As night fell, she arrived at the abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city. The place was dark, with only the sound of distant traffic breaking the silence. Aaliyah stood by the entrance, waiting. Richard would be here soon. As she waited, Aaliyah reflected on how far she had come. From the girl who had been humiliated by Vince, to the woman who now controlled everything. She had fought for every inch of this. And now, she was about to make her final move. The sound of a car engine broke her thoughts, and Aaliyah straightened, her gaze focused. Richard's car pulled into the parking lot, the headlights cutting through the darkness. He stepped out, his posture rigid, but his eyes cautious. He knew something was off. Aaliyah didn't waste time with pleasantries. "You've been with Vince for a long time, haven't you?" she asked, her voice steady. Richard nodded, his expression unreadable. "I have, and I've always done what was necessary." "So, you're a man who values loyalty?" Aaliyah asked, taking a step closer. "Of course," Richard replied. "Loyalty is Everything in this world. Aaliyah's lips curled into a small smile. Loyalty is a valuable asset, Richard. But loyalty to the wrong person can be your downfall. Richard stiffened, but Aaliyah wasn't done. You see, I know everything about Vince's business, and I know you've been working for me for the last few weeks. The truth is, I'm not here to play second fiddle. I'm here to be the one in charge. And that means you either work for me, or you disappear. The tension in the air was thick as Richard processed her words. He had been loyal to Vince, but he knew Aaliyah wasn't someone to be ignored. The choice was clear. He nodded slowly, his expression resigned. What do you want me to do? Aaliyah's smile widened. I want you to help me finish what we started. Vince's empire is mine now, and with your help, we'll make sure it stays that way. Are you with me, Richard? Richard hesitated for a moment, but in the end, he nodded. I'm with you. As he spoke the words, Aaliyah knew she had just made another powerful ally. With Richard on her side, nothing could stop her. Her plan was complete, and her empire was solidified. Aaliyah Thomas had not just taken Vince's power. She had claimed a world that was hers for the taking. Now, it was only a matter of time before everyone knew her name. Aaliyah stood at the top of the sleek glass building, overlooking the city that was now her domain. The skyline stretched out before her, the lights of the city flickering like stars in the distance. It was hard to believe how far she had come in such a short time. From the girl who had been thrown out of a club to the woman now holding the reins of Vince's empire, Aaliyah had surpassed every expectation. But the journey was far from over. Her empire was growing, and with it, the challenges were multiplying. Vince's former associates were watching her closely, and she knew that there were still those who were loyal to him, waiting for the right moment to strike. But Aaliyah wasn't worried. She had built her power on intelligence and patience. She knew how to play the long game, and she wasn't about to let anyone stand in her way. The office was quiet, save for the soft hum of the city outside. Aaliyah turned away from the window and walked over to the desk. Her phone buzzed on the surface, a reminder that her work was far from done. She glanced at the message, her eyes narrowing slightly as she read the contents. It was from Richard. We've got a problem. Someone's making moves. We need to meet. Aaliyah's heart rate didn't pick up. Instead, she grabbed her coat and headed out. The last thing she needed was a distraction, but she knew she couldn't ignore a potential threat. Richard had been her ally for weeks now, and she trusted him. If he said there was a problem, she would deal with it. As she walked down the steps to the street, her mind raced. Who could it be? Was someone challenging her authority, or was it simply a power play from someone trying to fill the void left by Vince? Either way, she wouldn't let it interfere with her plans. She had worked too hard to get here. Richard's office was located in a quiet part of the city, away from the bustling streets. As Aaliyah entered the building, she felt the weight of the situation settle in. Richard was already inside, his brow furrowed with concern. Aaliyah sat across from him, her posture poised, as always. What's going on? She asked, her voice steady. Richard leaned forward, his hands clasped in front of him. There's a new player in town, he said, his tone low. Someone is trying to take over the operations we've built. They're moving fast, and they know too much about us. Aaliyah didn't flinch. Who are they? She asked. Richard hesitated for a moment before answering. I don't know yet, but they've been reaching out to our contacts, pulling strings in places we thought were secure. It's not just a threat, it's a challenge. Aaliyah absorbed his words. It wasn't enough to scare her. She had faced challenges before, and she knew how to overcome them. We need to find out who this is and deal with them, she said firmly. Richard nodded, a look of respect in his eyes. I agree, but we need to move quickly. Whoever this is, they're not playing by the rules. Aaliyah stood up, her mind already planning her next steps. Then we'll make sure they learn what happens when they mess with us. Over. The next few days, Aaliyah worked tirelessly, gathering information and making connections. She knew the underground world better than anyone, and she used that to her advantage. Every person she spoke to, every deal she brokered, was another step toward uncovering the identity of the mysterious threat. Finally, after days of tracking down leads, Aaliyah got the information she needed. The new player was someone she knew, someone from her past, someone who had been watching her closely. It was Marcus Grant, a former associate of Vince's who had gone into hiding years ago after a falling out with Vince. Aaliyah had heard whispers about him, but she had never expected him to make a move against her. Marcus was smart, dangerous, and ambitious. But Aaliyah wasn't afraid. She had the power now, and she wasn't about to let anyone take it from her. She picked up the phone and dialed Richard. "We know who it is," she said, her voice calm, but with a steely edge. "It's Marcus Grant, and we're going to end this before it even starts." Richard's voice was filled with surprise, but also respect. "Marcus? I didn't see that coming." "Neither did I," Aaliyah replied. "But he made a mistake. He's about to learn just how dangerous it is to challenge me." The next few days were spent preparing for the confrontation. Aaliyah knew that Marcus wouldn't back down without a fight, but she was ready. She had learned everything she could about him, and she was confident in her ability to outsmart him. The final showdown came unexpectedly. Aaliyah was meeting with one of her trusted allies when she received a message. "Marcus is waiting for you. He wants to meet in person." Aaliyah didn't hesitate. She knew this was the moment. She wasn't going to let Marcus control the narrative. She had come this far, and she wasn't going to back down now. As she entered the meeting room, Marcus stood there, waiting for her. His face was calm, but there was something in his eyes that showed he was ready for a fight. "I didn't think you'd come," he said, his voice cold. Aaliyah smiled, her gaze steady. "I always come when it matters." The room was charged with tension, but Aaliyah was calm. She had everything in place. "This ends now, Marcus," she said, her voice firm. "You can either step aside, or I'll make sure you regret ever crossing me." Aaliyah stood across from Marcus in the dimly lit room, the tension in the air palpable. She had walked into this meeting knowing it would be a defining moment. Her heart didn't race. It never did when she was in control. She had built her empire carefully, piece by piece, and Marcus was just another obstacle to overcome. Marcus looked at her, his posture relaxed, but his eyes betrayed a hint of unease. He had underestimated her, thinking she would fold, thinking that her rise to power was just a stroke of luck. But now, here they were, facing each other as equals. "You really thought you could take over, didn't you?" Marcus said, his voice cool but edged with disbelief. Aaliyah didn't flinch. "I didn't think. I knew," she replied confidently. "And now, it's time for you to step aside." Marcus scoffed, shaking his head slightly. "You're naive if you think I'll just let you take what's mine," he said, his tone dripping with arrogance. Aaliyah took a deep breath, the weight of the moment sinking in. She had worked too hard to let someone like Marcus stand in her way. "It was never yours, Marcus. It was Vince's, and now it's mine. And that's something you'll have to accept." The silence between them was thick, like a storm about to break. Marcus was clearly trying to decide if he should push back or accept the reality that Aaliyah had outplayed him. He had spent years building his own network, making connections, and carving out his own space in this world. But Aaliyah had done the same. She had spent months preparing for this moment, anticipating every move Marcus might make, and now, it was her turn to lead. He took a step toward her, his eyes narrowing. "You really think you're ready to handle everything that comes with this?" he asked, his voice low and calculating. Aaliyah met his gaze with unwavering confidence. "I've been ready for a long time," she said. "It's you who's behind, Marcus. You're still stuck in the old ways, thinking the game is played with muscle and fear. But I play it with intelligence, with strategy, and that's why I'm going to win." Marcus stopped in his tracks, his lips tightening as he realized the truth in her words. He had spent so much time relying on his reputation, his connections, but Aaliyah had played him like a chess piece, moving quietly and strategically, one step at a time. "You've got guts, I'll give you that," Marcus said, his voice almost grudgingly admiring. "But do you really think you can take down everything I've built, everything Vince built, just like that?" Aaliyah took a step forward, her presence commanding the room. "I've already done it," she said, her voice steady and sure. "You just haven't realized it yet." Marcus blinked, processing her words. Aaliyah had already cut through his network, silently, without fanfare, and now, it was just a matter of him accepting the inevitable. "You've lost, Marcus. You don't have the power anymore." "I do." The finality of her words hung in the air, and for the first time, Marcus didn't have a response. He was caught in the realization that Aaliyah was right. She had already won. She had taken everything from him without a single blow, without violence or chaos, just pure strategy and patience. She had played the long game, and now, she was the one in control. Marcus turned away from her, his shoulders slumping as he walked toward the exit. "You won this time," he muttered, his voice low, resigned. Aaliyah didn't need his acknowledgement. She had what she came for, and now, she was the one who held the power. As Marcus left, Aaliyah stayed in the room, her eyes scanning the city skyline outside the window. This was just the beginning. Her empire was only getting stronger, and she knew that no one would dare challenge her again. She had earned this victory, and she would fight to keep it. The game was hers to win, and no one was going to take that away from her. Aaliyah turned away from the window, her gaze hardening. She had made it to the top, but now, she had to ensure she stayed there. The world was watching, and she was ready to prove that no one, not even someone like Marcus, could take her down. Aaliyah sat in her office, the weight of her success settling around her like a heavy cloak. The power she had fought for was finally hers, but as she sat there, she couldn't shake the feeling that the hardest part was still ahead. Running an empire was no easy task, especially when the people around you were constantly looking for weaknesses. Aaliyah knew that her rise to the top had made her a target, and now, she needed to prove she could hold on to it. The sound of a knock on the door broke her thoughts, and she turned to face the intruder. It was Richard, her trusted ally, the man who had helped her through the early days of her takeover. He stepped inside, closing the door behind him, and walked over to her desk. "We've got another problem," Richard said, his voice serious. Aaliyah raised an eyebrow, her mind already working. "What is it?" she asked, her tone calm but commanding. Richard hesitated for a moment before speaking. "There's a shift in the underground world. Some of Vince's old associates are starting to make moves. They're trying to consolidate power, and we're in their way." Aaliyah leaned back in her chair, absorbing the information. She wasn't surprised. She had expected this. There would always be people who tried to challenge her, people who couldn't accept that she was in control now. "What do we know about them?" she asked, her voice steady. Richard pulled out a folder from his briefcase and placed it on the desk in front of her. "It's a group of former associates, people who had a stake in Vince's operations but were kept in the dark. Now that he's gone, they're trying to pick up the pieces. They're not acting alone, though. There's someone behind them, pulling the strings." Aaliyah's mind raced as she examined the file. These were dangerous people, but she wasn't worried. She had faced bigger challenges. "So, what's the plan?" she asked, her eyes never leaving the file. "We find out who's leading them, and we cut them off before they can gain any real traction," Richard said. Aaliyah nodded. "Make it happen. I want to know who we're dealing with, and I want them gone before they can cause any more problems." Richard gave a curt nod and left the office, leaving Aaliyah to her thoughts. The game was shifting again, and Aaliyah was ready to play. The next few days were filled with meetings, phone calls, and a constant flow of information. Aaliyah moved quickly, analyzing every lead and every potential threat. She had learned how to stay ahead, how to anticipate moves before they were made. It wasn't just about being smart. It was about being prepared. As the days went by, Aaliyah learned more about the group of former associates who were trying to undermine her. They were well-connected, with ties to powerful figures in the city, but they lacked the control that Vince had once held. And that, Aaliyah knew, was their biggest weakness. They were scattered, disorganized, and desperate. The leader behind them remained a mystery, but Aaliyah wasn't going to waste time waiting to find out who it was. She would force them into the open. One evening, she met with Richard and several of her most trusted allies in a private location. The plan was simple: track down the group, cut off their resources, and leave them with no choice but to retreat. It was a calculated move, one that would send a message. Aaliyah wasn't just the woman who had taken Vince's place. She was the woman who would defend her position at all costs. As they discussed the details, Aaliyah's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen. It was a message from one of her contacts, an insider who had been following the movements of the former associates. "We've got a lead. Meet me at the docks in an hour. I'll show you who's pulling the strings." Aaliyah stood up from the table, her eyes narrowing with determination. "Let's go. It's time to end this." The docks were quiet when they arrived, the sounds of the water lapping against the shore the only noise in the stillness of the night. Aaliyah and her team moved with precision, their footsteps silent on the wet ground. They knew what they were looking for, a man who had been hiding in the shadows, pulling the strings of the underground world. The man who had been behind the power play. They found him in a small warehouse, tucked away in a corner of the docks. He was sitting at a table, surrounded by paperwork and documents that Aaliyah knew would contain the answers she needed. She stepped forward, her presence commanding the room. The man looked up, his face filled with surprise. I knew you'd come, he said, his voice calm but tinged with fear. You've been trying to take my place. Aaliyah didn't respond right away. Instead, she took a seat across from him, her gaze unwavering. I didn't take your place, she said softly. You were never in control. To begin with. The man's eyes flickered with uncertainty. You think you can just wipe me out like Vince? He asked, his voice rising slightly. Aaliyah smiled, but it wasn't a smile of kindness. You were never the one who mattered. And now, you're about to learn that the hard way. She stood up, her gaze sharp. It's over. The man tried to stand, but Aaliyah's presence was overwhelming. He had lost. She had won. And this time, there was no one who could stop her. Aaliyah watched the man, the leader of the former associates, as he slumped back in his chair, defeated. The cold warehouse air seemed to thicken around them, the only sound the distant hum of the city. Aaliyah felt a strange calm wash over her. This was what she had worked for, what she had sacrificed so much to achieve. And now, with the man before her on the verge of collapse, the final piece of the puzzle was in place. She had already secured her control of the underground network, but eliminating this last obstacle would send a clear message to anyone who might try to challenge her in the future. You think you can just walk away from this? The man asked, his voice filled with a mixture of disbelief and bitterness. You've taken everything from me. What's left for me to do now? Aaliyah stood there for a moment, her mind quiet, reflecting on his words. He was right about one thing. He had lost everything. But that was the game. In this world, power shifted constantly, and if you weren't prepared to adapt, you were left behind. You had your chance, Aaliyah said, her voice calm, almost too calm. But you played it wrong. You thought you could control the game by brute force, by fear. I play it differently. I play it with strategy, with understanding. That's why I'm standing here, and you're not. The man clenched his fists, frustration written all over his face. I had my empire, my people, and now it's all gone. What do you want from me? He asked, his voice cracking slightly. Aaliyah's eyes never wavered. What I want from you is simple. I want you to leave. Walk away from all of this. There's nothing left for you here. And if you try to rise again, I'll be watching. She let her words sink in, the weight of her authority clear in her voice. You've been a part of Vince's world, but that world is over now. I'm the new reality, and you're a relic of the past. The man opened his mouth, as though he wanted to argue, but the words never came. He knew it was futile. The truth was undeniable. Aaliyah had outmaneuvered him at every turn, and now, with just a few simple words, she had sealed his fate. She turned on her heel, ready to leave, but not before she left him with one last thought. You can either walk away and live the rest of your life in the shadows, or you can make the mistake of trying to challenge me again. But trust me, that would be a mistake. The man didn't speak as she left the warehouse, but Aaliyah didn't need him to. She knew the game was over. Her empire was secure. As Aaliyah made her way back to her office, she reflected on how far she had come. She had fought hard for this moment, and now it was hers. But she knew that power, while sweet, was fragile. It needed to be nurtured, protected, and most importantly, it needed to be expanded. Her plans for the future were already taking shape in her mind. She wasn't content with simply being the queen of the underground world. She wanted more. She wanted to reach higher, expand her influence into new territories, both legally and illegally. As she sat in her office, staring out at the city that was now under her control, she knew that the hard part was just beginning. There would be challenges ahead, rivals who would try to take her down, and obstacles she couldn't even foresee yet. But Aaliyah wasn't afraid. She had the mind, the will, and the strategy to handle whatever came her way. She had built this empire from the ground up, and she wasn't going to let anyone tear it down. As the days passed, Aaliyah continued to solidify her hold on the city. She met with key figures, made alliances, and, most importantly, kept an eye on her competition. There were whispers in the underground world, rumors of other players trying to muscle in on her territory. But Aaliyah was always 2 steps ahead. She knew when to make a move and when to wait. Patience was a key part of her strategy. In one of her meetings with her most trusted allies, she discussed the next phase of her plan. We need to keep expanding, she said, her voice calm but filled with determination. We can't afford to sit on our laurels. There's a bigger world out there, and I want us to control it. Richard, one of her most trusted men, nodded in agreement. You're right, he said. We've built a strong foundation, but there's always more to be gained. Exactly, Elias said. The next phase is about making sure no one can touch us. We need to secure our position in every way possible. From business deals to political influence, we have to make our mark everywhere. Richard smiled. We'll get it done. Elias stood up from her desk, her eyes filled with purpose. I didn't come this far to stop now. I've worked too hard, and I'm not backing down. This is only the beginning. She knew that her rise to power had been swift, but it was far from over. She had the world at her feet, and she would make sure it stayed that way. No one, not even the shadows of her past, would take that from her. Aaliyah Thomas had become the woman no one could touch, and now, she was ready to build the empire of her dreams. Aaliyah walked through the hallways of her new office building, each step echoing in the sleek, polished floors. The place was a symbol of her triumph, the physical manifestation of everything she had worked for. Yet, despite the lavish surroundings, Aaliyah knew that the hardest work was still ahead. Power was never permanent. It required constant vigilance, strategy, and the ability to adapt. As she entered her office, she couldn't help but reflect on the events that had led her here. She had taken everything from Vince. His empire, his contacts, his reputation. It had been a calculated move, and now it was hers. But the weight of this power wasn't lost on her. The world she now commanded was fragile, and it would only take one misstep to lose it all. Her desk was covered with documents, contracts, and plans for the future. There was a lot to be done, but for the first time in a while, Aaliyah felt confident. She had already proven she could take what she wanted. Now, it was time to make sure it stayed that way. She sat down at the desk and glanced at the clock. It was late, but Aaliyah had never been one to shy away from hard work. Her phone buzzed on the desk, and she picked it up, seeing a message from Richard. "We've got a situation," it read. Aaliyah's expression hardened as she opened the message. It was a lead about one of Vince's former partners, someone who had been keeping a low profile since Vince's downfall. Aaliyah had heard whispers about this man before. He was a shadow in the city, operating under the radar, but he had been involved in some of the more lucrative parts of Vince's business. If Aaliyah wanted to solidify her position, she couldn't afford to let this person continue to operate. She quickly typed a reply to Richard. "Where is he?" She didn't need to wait long for the response. "Meet me at the warehouse near Pier 14 in an hour. We'll have answers." Aaliyah grabbed her coat and left her office, her mind already shifting into the next phase of her plan. As she arrived at the warehouse, she noticed the quiet. There were no lights, no sounds, just the eerie stillness of an abandoned building on the outskirts of the city. Richard was already there, waiting by the entrance. He gave her a curt nod as she approached. "What do we know?" Aaliyah asked, her tone sharp. Richard handed her a file. "His name is George McKenna. He's been operating under the radar for months, but we've been tracking his movements. We believe he's trying to re-establish control over some of Vince's old operations." Aaliyah took the file and flipped through it. McKenna had connections to some of the wealthiest and most influential people in the city, but he had kept a low profile since Vince's downfall. It was clear he was waiting for the right moment to strike. Aaliyah didn't need to waste any time. "We're not waiting for him to make his move," she said, her eyes narrowing with determination. "We're making ours. I want McKenna out of the picture permanently." Richard hesitated for a moment, but then nodded. "Understood. I'll take care of the details." Aaliyah's mind was already racing with possibilities. McKenna had been a key player in Vince's network, and if he was trying to take back control, it could mean trouble for her. She couldn't afford to let anyone challenge her authority, not now, not when she was so close to cementing her place at the top. Over the next few days, Aaliyah continued to gather intel on McKenna and his operations. She learned everything she could about his movements, his contacts, and his weaknesses. She didn't plan to take him down with brute force. No, Aaliyah was far too clever for that. She would use his own mistakes against him. The key to her success had always been her ability to stay 2 steps ahead of her enemies, and McKenna would be no different. The opportunity came sooner than expected. Aaliyah received word that McKenna would be meeting with one of his associates at an old warehouse on the outskirts of town. It was the perfect chance to strike. She gathered a small team and made her way to the location. As they arrived, Aaliyah signaled for them to stay hidden. She didn't want to rush into anything. Patience had always been her greatest asset. They watched as McKenna and his associate arrived. walking into the building with no regard for the security around them. It was a mistake. Aaliyah knew exactly what to do. She moved swiftly, her team following her lead. They surrounded the warehouse, cutting off any possible escape routes. Aaliyah approached the building from the back, where the shadows hid her presence. She made her way inside, moving silently through the dark corridors until she reached the room where McKenna and his associate were talking. She stood at the door for a moment, listening to their conversation. "This is our chance," McKenna's voice echoed in the quiet room. "With Vince gone, we can take over. We just need to move fast before anyone else notices." Aaliyah's lips curled into a smile. She had been right. McKenna thought he could simply slip back into the power vacuum left by Vince's fall. He was underestimating her, and it would cost him. She stepped forward, entering the room. "You've underestimated me, McKenna," she said, her voice cold and sharp. McKenna froze, his eyes wide with shock. His associate jumped to his feet, but Aaliyah was quicker. "I know everything about you," she continued. "Your plans, your contacts, your every move. And I'm here to stop you before you can make a mistake." McKenna stood there, speechless, realizing too late that he was no longer in control. Aaliyah had taken everything from Vince, and now she was taking it from him too. She didn't need to explain herself further. McKenna was finished, and she was ready to take the next step in her journey to the top. Aaliyah stood in the dimly lit warehouse, her mind racing as she watched McKenna process the reality of what was happening. The walls of the room seemed to close in on him as his gaze flickered between her and the door, realizing there was no way out. His associate had already been neutralized, caught in the web Aaliyah had meticulously spun. The pieces were all falling into place. McKenna, once a powerful figure in the underground world, now seemed like a cornered animal, scrambling for an escape that no longer existed. His once commanding presence was now reduced to a shadow of his former self. Aaliyah stepped closer, her heels clicking against the concrete floor, each sound sharp and deliberate, echoing in the silent space. "You made the mistake of thinking you could come back," Aaliyah said, her voice steady, not a trace of hesitation in her tone. "You thought you could step into the void Vince left behind. But what you didn't realize is that the void isn't there for the taking. It's mine, and I'm not letting anyone take it from me." McKenna opened his mouth, likely to protest, to threaten, but the words faltered as he saw the unwavering confidence in Aaliyah's eyes. He had been a part of Vince's world, but he had underestimated just how much had changed in that world. "You're too late," Aaliyah continued, her voice cold and clear. "You think you can just take what you want? No, I've already taken control. You're already out of the game." McKenna clenched his fists, his face contorted with frustration. "You don't understand what you've done," he spat, his voice thick with anger. "You think you can just wipe us all out, that you're the one in charge now? It's not that simple, Aaliyah. You'll never hold on to it. You'll never last." Aaliyah stood her ground, her posture unyielding. "You're wrong," she said, her voice carrying the weight of everything she had worked for. "I've already lasted. I'm already the one in control, and I'm not going anywhere. You're the one who's about to disappear." McKenna's face twisted with a mix of anger and fear. "You think you've won?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "You have no idea who you're dealing with. I have people, connections, people who'll come after you, tear everything you've built apart." Aaliyah gave him a small, knowing smile. "You really think I don't know that? You really think I haven't prepared for it? This isn't just about you, McKenna. It's about everyone who thought they could take what was mine." She paused for a moment, allowing her words to sink in. "I didn't get here by making enemies I couldn't handle. I know exactly how to play this game, and I'm not backing down. You should have learned that by now." McKenna's anger flared, but he remained rooted to the spot, the realization dawning on him that he was powerless in the face of Aaliyah's unshakable confidence. He had underestimated her from the beginning, and now it was too late. There was no way to recover. "It's over," Aaliyah said softly, almost as if she were talking to herself. "You're done, McKenna." The finality of her words echoed through the cold, empty room. McKenna took a step back, his eyes narrowing. He had always been a man who relied on his connections, his ability to manipulate and control others. But he had failed to realize one simple truth: Aaliyah didn't need anyone else. She had built her empire on her own terms, with her own strategy. And now, that strategy was paying off. McKenna knew the game was over. He had lost. But Aaliyah wasn't done yet. She knew that this was just one battle in a much larger war. McKenna may have been out of the picture, but there would be others who would try to rise up and challenge her. She would need to stay sharp, stay ahead of them, and keep building her power. But for now, as she watched McKenna retreat into the shadows, Aaliyah knew one thing for sure. She had claimed her place at the top. No one would take it from her. She had outsmarted every player who had underestimated her, and now the city was hers. It was time to solidify her position, to take what was rightfully hers, and make sure that no one could ever threaten her again. The world was watching, and Aaliyah was ready to prove that she was untouchable. She turned away from the warehouse, her mind already focused on the next steps. She had a world to conquer, and no one would stand in her way. Aaliyah walked through the grand lobby of her new headquarters, her heels clicking against the marble floors. The building was a reflection of her hard-earned success, with its towering glass walls and luxurious design. It was a far cry from the small cafe she had worked in just months ago, but as she looked around, she felt the weight of her position. This was the life she had fought for, and now, she was ready to expand it even further. The city outside was still, the glow of streetlights shining through the windows, but inside, the pulse of Aaliyah's empire beat louder with every passing day. She had secured her place at the top, but there was so much more to do. The underworld was always in flux, and Aaliyah knew that she had to keep moving forward if she wanted to remain untouchable. As she entered her office, Richard was already there, waiting. He stood up as she walked in, his expression serious. "We have a situation," he said, his voice low. Aaliyah didn't flinch. She had expected as much. Power didn't come without its challenges. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice steady. Richard handed her a file, and Aaliyah opened it without hesitation. Inside, she found information about a group of new players in the city, rivals who were trying to move in on her territory. They were bold, ambitious, and willing to take risks, but Aaliyah wasn't concerned. She had dealt with threats before. "These people think they can challenge me," Aaliyah said, her eyes scanning the pages. "But they don't know who they're dealing with." Richard nodded. "They're making moves in some of the same areas we've been focused on. If they get too big, they could become a problem." Aaliyah closed the file and placed it on her desk. "I won't let them," she said firmly. "We'll show them who's in charge." She didn't need to think twice. This was just another obstacle, and she had dealt with plenty before. The key was to act swiftly and decisively. She couldn't afford to let anyone challenge her authority. "What's the next step?" Richard asked. Aaliyah leaned back in her chair, her eyes fixed on the city skyline outside. "We find out who's behind them, and we take them down before they can even make a move," she said. "I won't let anyone undermine what I've built." Richard gave a slight nod. "Understood. I'll get to work on it right away." As Richard left her office, Aaliyah's mind raced. She wasn't surprised by the challenge. She had been expecting it. But she knew that this was just a test. One that would prove whether she could hold on to her power and continue to expand her influence. She wasn't about to back down. The city was hers, and she wasn't going to let anyone take it from her. The days that followed were filled with planning, strategy, and calculated moves. Aaliyah gathered information, made calls, and used every resource at her disposal to track down the new players who were trying to muscle in on her turf. She wasn't afraid of competition. She welcomed it. After all, it was the nature of the game. But she also knew that it was essential to strike before anyone else could. One evening, Aaliyah sat in a dimly lit restaurant, the perfect spot for a meeting. Her target was meeting with one of his contacts, and Aaliyah intended to be there when the deal went down. She wasn't there to make a scene. No, she was there to observe, to gather information, and to plan her next move. As she sat at her table, her eyes flickered over the room. Her target, a man named Simon Hayes, sat at the bar, engaged in a quiet conversation with a well-dressed man she didn't recognize. Aaliyah studied them both, watching for any signs of weakness. Simon was one of the new players in town, and Aaliyah had learned enough about him to know that he was ambitious and ruthless. He thought he could take control of the city's underground operations, but Aaliyah wasn't about to let that happen. She had already seen enough to know that he was vulnerable. He had allies, but they weren't as loyal as he thought. Aaliyah's eyes narrowed as Simon's conversation grew more animated. She could tell he was trying to make a deal, trying to secure more territory for himself. But Aaliyah was already one step ahead. She knew his playbook, and she knew how to use it. Against him. As Simon stood to leave, Aaliyah followed him out of the restaurant, keeping her distance but making sure she was seen. She needed him to know she was watching. She needed him to know that no matter where he went, she would always be one step ahead. The next day, Aaliyah had a meeting with her top associates. She wasn't going to waste any more time. The time to act was now. "We know who he is," she said, her voice low and controlled. "Simon Hayes. He thinks he can take over the city, but he doesn't realize who he's up against." Her associates nodded, ready to follow her lead. "We're going to make sure he doesn't get the chance to move in on our territory," Aaliyah continued. "We'll take out his resources, cut off his allies, and make sure he knows that he's not welcome here." There was no hesitation in her voice. This was how the game was played, and Aaliyah knew she was playing it better than anyone else. The next few days were filled with action. Aaliyah's network moved quickly, cutting off Simon's supply lines and undermining his deals. She used her connections to weaken his position, making sure he couldn't build the momentum he needed. By the time Simon realized what was happening, it was already too late. Aaliyah had already secured her position, and he was left scrambling to recover what he had lost. As the days went by, the message was clear: no one was going to take what was hers. The city was under her control, and no one, not even Simon Hayes, was going to take that away from her. Aaliyah had fought hard for this, and now, she was going to keep it. The game was hers to win, and she wasn't about to lose. Aaliyah sat in her office, staring out at the city lights below, reflecting on everything she had accomplished. The empire she had built was hers, unshakable, and expanding every day. But she knew better than to let her guard down. In this world, power was fleeting, and there were always challenges to overcome. The message she had sent to Simon Hayes was clear: she would not be moved, and no one would take what was hers. But as much as she relished her victory, Aaliyah understood the importance of maintaining control, of always being one step ahead. As she pondered her next moves, her phone rang. It was Richard, the most trusted of her allies. "We've got some new intel," Richard said, his voice serious. "It looks like someone from your past is making a move. They're trying to get back into the game, and they know exactly who to target." Aaliyah's mind immediately went to work. Who could it be? She had eliminated most of her rivals, but there were always those who lingered in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike. "Tell me everything," she said, her voice steady, showing no sign of worry. Richard filled her in on the details. The person trying to re-enter the scene was someone Aaliyah had once considered a friend, a person she had trusted. It was Mia, a former associate who had helped Aaliyah navigate the complex underworld when she was first starting out. Aaliyah had always known that Mia was ambitious, but she had never anticipated that she would try to challenge her now, not after everything they had been through. "Why now?" Aaliyah asked, her voice calm but tinged with disbelief. "Mia's been out of the picture for years. Why would she try to come back now?" Richard's response was quick. "She's desperate. The people she's been working with are losing ground, and they see you as the biggest obstacle. Mia believes she can get what she wants by taking you down. She's playing a dangerous game, and she's willing to risk everything to get back to the top." Aaliyah thought for a moment, her mind calculating the situation. Mia was no fool, and if she was making a move now, it meant she had something Aaliyah didn't know about. The question was, what was it? "I won't let her get close," Aaliyah said, her voice firm. "We need to find her and neutralize this threat before she can make any real moves." Richard agreed, and they began making plans to deal with Mia's sudden return. Aaliyah knew that Mia was a skilled manipulator, but she also knew that she had the upper hand now. She had worked hard to get where she was, and she wasn't about to let someone from her past throw it all away. Over the next few days, Aaliyah's network worked tirelessly to track down Mia's movements. They followed every lead, connected the dots, and gathered as much information as possible. As they did, it became clear that Mia was trying to form alliances with some of the city's most influential figures, people who could help her regain her power. But Aaliyah wasn't worried. She had her own alliances, and she was in a position now where she could outmaneuver anyone who tried to challenge her. Aaliyah was always prepared. One evening, she sat in a private meeting with her closest advisors, her mind focused on the task at hand. "Mia's desperate," she said, her tone calm but filled with resolve. "But desperation makes people sloppy. We can use that to our advantage." Her advisors nodded, recognizing the strategy she was laying out. We need to find a way to expose her plans, make it clear to her allies that she's not as trustworthy as she seems, Aaliyah continued. Once we do that, the game will be over. Mia will have no support, and she'll have no choice but to step aside. They all agreed on the plan, and Aaliyah set the wheels in motion. Over the next few days, her team worked to gather incriminating evidence against Mia, uncovering the deals she was trying to make with those who were already loyal to Aaliyah. It didn't take long for Aaliyah to have what she needed. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place when Mia tried to make a deal with a rival faction, offering them inside information about Aaliyah's operations. It was a mistake, and Aaliyah knew exactly how to use it. She called Richard. "It's time," she said, her voice steady with purpose. "We're going to expose Mia for who she really is." The plan was simple: leak the evidence of Mia's betrayal to her allies, making sure that everyone knew what she had been trying to do behind Aaliyah's back. They would isolate her, cut her off from any support, and leave her with no option but to back down. Aaliyah didn't need to confront Mia directly. She was already defeated by her own actions. The news spread quickly, and soon, Mia found herself without a network, without support, and with nowhere to turn. Her once promising rise to power had crumbled before she even had a chance to fully act. Aaliyah's empire remained untouched, stronger than ever. Mia had underestimated Aaliyah, and it had cost her everything. As Aaliyah sat back in her office, watching the city lights twinkle in the distance, she felt the weight of the moment settle in. She had secured her position, proven that she was not to be challenged. And now, she could turn her focus to the next stage of her journey, expanding her empire even further. She had risen to the top once, and she would make sure she stayed there. No one would take her power from her, not Mia, not anyone.